Long before 24/7 sports coverage and social media debates, every franchise had one player who represented everything. Not just the best player, not just the most talented, the one fans associated with the uniform. When you thought of the Yankees, there was one face. When you thought of the Red Sox, there was one hitter. When you thought of the Dodgers, there was one number that meant more than the rest. They weren't interchangeable stars. They were the symbol of the team, the player whose name became shorthand for the entire franchise. First up, Babe Ruth. Imagine a 7-year-old boy, abandoned by his parents, living in a reform school in Baltimore. A child so troubled that his own family declared him incorrigible. Now imagine that same boy growing up to become the most famous athlete in American history, a man whose name would become synonymous with greatness. This is the story of George Herman Ruth Jr., better known to the world as Babe Ruth, the Bambino, the Sultan of SWAT. He did not just play baseball, he transformed it. He did not just break records, he shattered the very concept of what was possible in the sport. And his journey from the streets of Baltimore to becoming America's first true sports superstar is one of the most remarkable stories in the history of athletics. So sit back, because today we are diving deep into the life and legacy of a man who changed not just baseball, but American culture itself. George Herman Ruth Jr. was born on February 6, 1895, at 216 Emory Street in the Pigtown neighborhood of Baltimore, Maryland. The house belonged to his maternal grandfather, Pius Schamberger, a German immigrant and trade unionist. Both of Ruth's parents, Catherine Schamberger and George Herman Ruth Sr., were of German ancestry. As a child, young George even spoke German at home. His father worked a series of jobs, from lightning rod salesman to streetcar operator, before eventually becoming a counterman in a family-owned combination grocery and saloon business. The Ruth family lived above various saloons in a tough waterfront neighborhood where danger lurked around every corner. Life was brutal for the Ruth family. Of the 8 children born to George Sr. and Catherine, only 2 survived infancy, George Jr. and his younger sister Mamie. The constant tragedy, combined with the demands of running a saloon, meant that neither parent had much time for their surviving son. Catherine was often sickly, and George Sr. worked long hours. Left largely unsupervised, young George roamed the rough waterfront streets of Baltimore. He fell into trouble early and often, skipping school, drinking, chewing tobacco, and taunting local police officers. He engaged in petty theft and vandalism. By all accounts, he was a handful that his busy parents simply could not control. Shortly after his 7th birthday, in 1902, George Ruth Sr. and Catherine made a difficult decision. They petitioned the Baltimore courts to declare their son incorrigible and sent him to live at St. Mary's Industrial School for Boys, located on the outskirts of the city. This Catholic institution, run by the Zavarian brothers, was part orphanage, part trade school, and part reform school. For most children, being sent away at such a young age would have been devastating. But for George Ruth, St. Mary's would prove to be his salvation. The rules were strict, and the brothers enforced discipline, but they also taught vocational skills and encouraged sports. Most importantly for young George, it was at St. Mary's that he discovered his extraordinary talent for baseball. At St. Mary's, George met the man who would change his life forever. Brother Matthias, the school's prefect of discipline. Brother Matthias was a towering figure, standing well over 6 feet tall and commanding immense respect from the boys through both his physical presence and his fundamental fairness. The Canadian-born priest became a father figure to the troubled young boy. Ruth would later say of him that he taught me to read and write, and he taught me the difference between right and wrong. He was the father I needed and the greatest man I have ever known. Brother Matthias spent countless afternoons with young George, tossing worn-out baseballs into the air and swatting them out to the boys. Ruth watched in amazement. He would recall years later that he had never seen anything like that in his life. He said he thought he was born as a hitter the first day he ever saw Brother Matthias hit a baseball. The older man worked tirelessly with George, teaching him to hit, field, and pitch. For hours at a time, they would practice together, honing the skills that would one day make Ruth the most feared hitter in baseball history. Brother Matthias also played a role in turning George into a pitcher. Legend has it that one day George was teasing his team's pitcher, who was having a rough outing. Brother Matthias responded by putting George into the game as a reliever. The young man pitched brilliantly, and from that day forward, he became a regular pitcher. Ruth's running and hitting styles would closely resemble those of his beloved mentor for the rest of his life. The bond between the troubled boy and the patient priest was remarkable. As biographer Robert W. Creamer noted, Ruth revered Brother Matthias, which was extraordinary. Considering that Matthias was in charge of making boys behave, and Ruth was one of the great natural misbehavers of all time. By the time George was 15, his exceptional baseball skills had become the talk of St. Mary's. The brothers recognized his talent and began inviting scouts to watch him play. In February 1914, Jack Dunn, the owner of the minor league Baltimore Orioles, came to observe the 19-year-old George Ruth in action. Dunn watched Ruth for less than an hour before offering him a contract for $600 for the season. Since George was only 19 and still technically a ward of St. Mary's, Dunn had to become Ruth's legal guardian to complete the paperwork. This arrangement would soon give rise to the most famous nickname in sports history. When Ruth arrived at spring training in Fayetteville, North Carolina, in early March 1914, it was likely his first trip outside the Baltimore area. The train journey itself was an adventure for a young man who had spent most of his formative years behind the protective walls of St. Mary's. The rookie ball player was the subject of various pranks by veteran players, but he also earned a new identity. There are various accounts of how George Ruth came to be called Babe, but most center on his being referred to as Dunny's Babe or Jack's newest babe. The innocent, wide-eyed young man, so new to the world outside St. Mary's, seemed like a baby compared to the hardened veterans. The nickname stuck, and George Herman Ruth Jr. became Babe Ruth, a name that would echo through sports history for over a century. Ruth quickly distinguished himself on the diamond during spring training. In 2 outings against the Philadelphia Phillies, he faced 29 batters and allowed only 6 hits and 2 unearned runs. The following week, he threw a complete game victory over the Philadelphia Athletics, winners of 3 of the last 4 World Series. The talent was undeniable. Despite the Orioles' success on the field, the team was struggling financially. By late June 1914, Dunn found himself in a difficult position, with paid attendance dropping to as low as 150 fans. He had no choice but to sell his best players to raise money. On July 4, 1914, Ruth's contract, along with those of pitchers Ernie Shore and Ben Egan, was sold to the Boston Red Sox of the American League. Ruth arrived in Boston on July 11, 1914, and that very afternoon he won his first game as a Red Sox pitcher, defeating the Cleveland Naps 4-3. His catcher that day was Bill Carrigan, who was also the Red Sox manager. Carrigan became a mentor to the young Ruth, even rooming with him and teaching him the fundamentals of the game. It was also on that day, according to Ruth's own account, that he met Helen Woodford, a 16-year-old waitress at Lander's coffee shop. Ruth said she served him when he had breakfast there. Within a few months after the season concluded, the two were married on October 14, 1914. Babe was 20 years old, and Helen was just 17. They were married that autumn. In his first full season with the Red Sox in 1915, Ruth finished with an impressive 18 wins and 8 losses as a pitcher, along with a batting average of .315 and 4 home runs. The Red Sox won the American League pennant that year, though Ruth was not called upon to pitch in the World Series against the Philadelphia Phillies. Boston won in 5 games. 18 wins marked a strong start to his major league career. The following year, 1916, Ruth emerged as one of the best left-handed pitchers in baseball. He compiled a record of 23 wins and 12 losses, leading the league with an earned run average of just 1.75. He also pitched 9 shutouts, the most for American League lefties that season, a record that would stand until Ron Guidry equaled it in 1978. In the 1916 World Series against the Brooklyn Robins, Ruth delivered one of the most remarkable pitching performances in postseason history. In Game 2, he engaged in a tightly contested duel with Brooklyn's Sherry Smith. After giving up an inside-the-park home run to Hy Myers in the first inning, Ruth settled in and threw scoreless ball for the next 13 innings. The Red Sox won 2-1 in 14 innings, the longest pitching outing in baseball postseason history. Ruth continued his dominance in 1917, going 24 wins and 13 losses with a 2.01 earned run average, and an astonishing 35 complete games in 38 starts. By then, he had displayed enormous power in his limited plate appearances, and it was becoming clear that his hitting was too valuable to be left out of the lineup on a daily basis. In 1918, Ruth tied for the Major League lead in home runs with 11, while also going 13 wins and 7 losses on the mound. The Red Sox won their 4th World Series title in 7 seasons that year, with Ruth contributing both as a pitcher and a hitter. He extended his record of consecutive scoreless innings in World Series play to 29 2/3 innings, a record that would stand for over 40 years until Whitey Ford broke it. By 1919, Ruth had made the full transition from pitcher to everyday player. That season, he smashed 29 home runs, obliterating the previous single-season record of 24 set by Ned Williamson in 1884. The baseball world had never seen anything like it. Here was a former pitcher who could hit the ball farther and more often than anyone in history. In just over 5 seasons with the Red Sox, Ruth had established himself as one of the premier left-handed pitchers in the game, winning 89 games and losing 46. He was also a member of 3 World Series championship teams. But all of that was about to change with one of the most controversial transactions in sports history. On December 26, 1919, Boston Red Sox owner Harry Frazee made a decision that would haunt his franchise for 86 years. He sold Babe Ruth's contract to the New York Yankees. The circumstances surrounding the sale were complex. Frazee was a theatrical producer who was hemorrhaging money because his Broadway productions were struggling. Despite a pennant-winning season in 1918, dwindling wartime attendance had caused the club's gate receipts to drop significantly. Ruth, fully aware of his value and baseball's growing popularity, was demanding his salary be doubled to $20,000 per year, twice what even the great Ty Cobb was making. Yankees owners Jacob Ruppert and Tillinghast Houston offered Frazee a deal he felt he could not refuse: $100,000 in cash, plus a loan of $300,000 secured by a mortgage on Fenway Park. The sale price was unprecedented, the highest ever paid for a baseball player at that time. Frazee tried to downplay the effects of the sale, calling Ruth selfish and claiming the Yankees were taking a gamble. But the gamble paid off spectacularly for New York. The Red Sox, winners of 5 of the first 16 World Series, would not win another pennant until 1946, or another World Series until 2004, a drought that became known as the Curse of the Bambino. The Yankees, on the other hand, had never won an American League championship before acquiring Ruth. With him, they would win 7 pennants and 4 World Series titles. The franchise that had once played in the shadow of the New York Giants would become the most successful team in baseball history, eventually capturing 41 pennants and 27 World Series championships. When Babe Ruth arrived in New York in 1920, baseball was in crisis. The Black Sox scandal of 1919, in which 8 Chicago White Sox players were accused of intentionally losing the World Series to the Cincinnati Reds, had shattered public confidence in the sport. Attendance was down, and the integrity of America's pastime was in serious question. Ruth almost single-handedly saved baseball. In his first season as a Yankee, he shattered his own single-season home run record by hitting an astonishing 54 home runs. 25 more than he had hit in 1919. No other team in the American League combined hit more than 56 home runs that year. The entire Cleveland Indians roster hit just 26. The Yankees drew 1.29 million fans in 1920, setting a new attendance record. Ruth's popularity made the team the most talked about in baseball. His performances were so stunning, so beyond the known standards of the day, that they inspired a new sports adjective, Ruthian. The following season, Ruth did even better. In 1921, he launched 59 home runs, drove in 171 runs, scored 177 runs, batted .376, and posted an unheard-of .846 slugging percentage. Many consider it the greatest offensive season in baseball history. The numbers were so staggering that they seemed almost fictional. Ruth's drawing power was so immense that the Yankees were able to finance the construction of their own stadium. In 1923, the magnificent new Yankee Stadium opened in the Bronx, immediately dubbed by sports writer Fred Lieb as the house that Ruth built. On opening day, April 18, 1923, an astounding 74,200 fans flooded through the turnstiles, while another 25,000 were turned away. The previous attendance record for a single game had been 42,000. In a fitting twist, the first game at the new stadium was played against the Boston Red Sox, Ruth's former team. And in a moment that seemed scripted by destiny, Ruth hit the first home run in Yankee Stadium history, a 3-run blast that gave the Yankees a 4-1 victory. His wife, Claire, would later say it was the proudest moment of his life. She said he talked about that home run more than any other, including his 60th. From 1926 through 1932, Ruth's offensive output towered over all other players in the game. It was dominance. During those 7 seasons, he averaged 49 home runs per year, batted in 151 runs, and maintained a batting average of .353, while leading the Yankees to 4 league pennants and 3 World Series championships. But it was 1927 that would become the stuff of legend. That year, Ruth was part of a lineup known as Murderer's Row, considered by many to be the greatest team ever assembled. The batting order of Earle Combs, Mark Koenig, Babe Ruth, Lou Gehrig, Bob Meusel, and Tony Lazzeri struck fear into every opposing pitcher. The 1927 Yankees finished with a record of 110 wins and 44 losses, winning the American League pennant by 19 games. They batted .307 as a team, slugged .489, and scored 975 runs. They outscored their opponents by a record 376 runs. Ruth led the charge with one of the most remarkable individual seasons in baseball history. He batted .356, drove in 164 runs, scored 158 runs, walked 137 times, and slugged .772. But it was his home run total that captured the nation's imagination. Entering September, Ruth was locked in a friendly competition with his teammate Lou Gehrig for the home run crown. Gehrig had briefly taken the lead in early September, but Ruth responded with a furious stretch run. He hit 17 home runs in September alone, including 2 on September 29th to tie his own record of 59. On September 30th, 1927, the final day of the season, Ruth stepped to the plate against Washington Senators pitcher Tom Zachary. In the 8th inning, with the score tied 2-2, Ruth launched a pitch into the right field bleachers for his 60th home run of the season, 60th. After the game, Ruth exulted. "Let's see some son of a bitch try to top that one." That record would stand for 34 years until Roger Maris hit 61 in 1961. But the context of Ruth's achievement makes it even more remarkable. In 1927, no other American League team combined hit more than 56 home runs. Ruth out-homered entire franchises by himself. The 1927 Yankees capped their legendary season by sweeping the Pittsburgh Pirates in 4 games in the World Series. The National Leaguers were reportedly so demoralized after watching the Yankees take batting practice before Game 1 with ball after ball sailing into the seats that they never recovered. The legend of Murderer's Row was complete. If there is one moment that encapsulates everything about Babe Ruth, his showmanship, his confidence, his larger-than-life persona, it is the legendary called shot in the 1932 World Series. The Yankees faced the Chicago Cubs, and tension between the two teams had been building for weeks. Former Yankees shortstop Mark Koenig had helped the Cubs reach the World Series after being acquired mid-season, but his teammates had voted to give him only a half share of their bonus money. When Ruth heard about this, he lambasted the Cubs in the press, calling them cheap bums and chiselers. The Cubs responded with a torrent of profanity from their dugout, and their fans joined in, reportedly cursing and spitting on Ruth and his wife Claire as they arrived at Wrigley Field for Game 3. The atmosphere was electric with hostility. Ruth had already hit a 3-run homer in the first inning when he came to bat in the 5th, with the score tied 4-4. Cubs pitcher Charlie Root threw strike 1, and Ruth held up one finger toward the Cubs dugout. After strike 2, he made another gesture, this one more dramatic, pointing either toward Root, the Cubs bench, or the center field bleachers, depending on whose account you believe. On the next pitch, Ruth crushed the ball over the center field fence, reportedly nearly 500 feet. As he rounded the bases, he laughed at the stunned Cubs players. Lou Gehrig followed with his own home run, and the Yankees won 7-5 on their way to a 4-game sweep. Did Ruth actually call his shot? The debate has raged for nearly a century. Reporter Joe Williams wrote the next day that Ruth had pointed to center field before delivering. Ruth himself initially said he was showing the Cubs he still had one strike left, but later embraced the legend, saying, "It is in the papers, is it not?" Even a film of the at-bat discovered decades later proved inconclusive. What is certain is that in a hostile environment, with thousands of fans screaming against him, Ruth delivered one of the most dramatic moments in sports history. As one historian noted, what always gets diminished in the controversy about whether it was a called shot is that it was an unbelievable moment in which a player was challenged, and Ruth responded emphatically, as only he could. Off the field, Babe Ruth lived a life as large as his on-field exploits. He was a man of enormous appetites, famous for his love of food, drink, and good times. Stories abound of Ruth consuming 20 hot dogs and 8 sodas between games of a doubleheader, or spending nights partying until dawn before hitting home runs the next afternoon. His marriage to Helen Woodford was troubled almost from the start. Though he gave her furs, an 80-acre farm in Sudbury, Massachusetts, and adopted a daughter named Dorothy in 1921, he gave her neither time nor fidelity. His countless affairs caused Helen to have nervous breakdowns, and the couple eventually separated in 1925, though as Catholics they never divorced. In 1923, Ruth met Claire Hodgson, a beautiful model and showgirl from Athens, Georgia. Claire had come to New York with her daughter Julia after her first husband died in 1921. She and Ruth began an affair that would continue for years while he remained married to Helen. Then tragedy struck in January 1929 when Helen died in a mysterious house fire. Just 3 months later, on April 17, 1929, Ruth married Claire in an early morning ceremony on opening day at Yankee Stadium. The marriage transformed Ruth's life. Claire became his personal manager, controlling his outrageous spending and monitoring his eating habits. She brought stability and discipline to a man who had known little of either throughout his life. The blended family included Dorothy, whom Claire adopted, and Julia, whom Ruth adopted. They lived in a 14-room apartment in New York, along with Claire's mother and 2 brothers. By all accounts, Ruth was a devoted father who adored his daughters. He was the greatest dad, both daughters would later say. Ruth was also known for his generosity, particularly toward children. He made countless visits to sick children in hospitals, often without seeking publicity. He would sign autographs for hours, never turning away a young fan. The boy who had been abandoned at age 7 never forgot what it felt like to be a child in need. By the early 1930s, Ruth's playing skills were beginning to decline. Never the most physically fit player, his conditioning deteriorated to the point that running and fielding became difficult, though he could still hit. After the 1934 season, his last with the Yankees, Ruth desperately wanted to become a manager, but no offer came from New York. In February 1935, Ruth signed with the Boston Braves, returning to the city where his major league career had begun. The Braves promised him titles of vice president and assistant manager, hinting that he might eventually take over as skipper. But it was all a charade. Owner Emil Fuchs simply wanted Ruth to boost gate receipts for his struggling franchise. Ruth's time with the Braves was brief and painful. He struggled at the plate and in the field, hitting just a .181 batting average with 6 home runs. But he saved one last moment of glory for the end. On May 25, 1935, in Pittsburgh against the Pirates, Ruth went 4 for 4 with 3 home runs, including a towering blast that sailed completely out of Forbes Field, the first time anyone had hit a fair ball over the right field roof. That final home run, his 714th career blast, would remain the all-time record until Hank Aaron broke it in 1974. Ruth was urged to retire on that high note, but he had given his word to play through Memorial Day. His final major league appearance came on May 30th, 1935, in Philadelphia. He retired on June 2nd, ending a career that had spanned 22 seasons. After retirement, Ruth hoped to manage a major league team, but the opportunity never came. Some said his wild reputation made owners reluctant to give him that responsibility. He served briefly as a coach for the Brooklyn Dodgers in 1938, but spent most of his remaining years playing golf, fishing, and making personal appearances. In 1936, Ruth was among the first 5 players elected to the newly established Baseball Hall of Fame in Cooperstown, New York, alongside Ty Cobb, Honus Wagner, Christy Mathewson, and Walter Johnson. It was fitting recognition for a man who had transformed the sport. In the fall of 1946, Ruth was diagnosed with a malignant tumor on his neck. It was throat cancer. His health deteriorated rapidly over the following months, though he continued to make public appearances when he could. He became one of the first cancer patients to receive both radiation and chemotherapy treatment. On June 13, 1948, Ruth made his final appearance at Yankee Stadium for the ballpark's 25th anniversary celebration. The man who had once seemed so invincible now looked frail and thin, using a bat as a cane. His voice, once booming, had been reduced to a hoarse whisper by the cancer. The photograph taken that day by Nat Fine, showing Ruth from behind as he stood near home plate, looking out at Ruthville, became one of the most iconic images in sports history. 2 months later, on August 16, 1948, Babe Ruth died at Memorial Hospital in New York City. He was 53 years old. His body lay in state at the entrance of Yankee Stadium, and over 100,000 mourners came to pay their respects to the man who had built the house. Thousands more attended his funeral mass at St. Patrick's Cathedral. Baseball Commissioner Happy Chandler spoke for millions when he said that his death would be a deep distress. He said that Ruth was one of his personal friends, and that it grieved him greatly that the nation had lost him. What Babe Ruth meant to baseball and to America cannot be measured in statistics alone, though his numbers remain staggering. He finished his career with a .342 batting average, 714 home runs, and 2,214 runs batted in. His career slugging percentage of .690 remains the highest in Major League history. His on-base percentage of .474 is second only to Ted Williams. He led the league in home runs 12 times, including 11 seasons of 40 or more, the most in history. He held or shared about 60 records at the time of his retirement. His World Series record of 29 2/3 consecutive scoreless innings pitched stood for over 40 years. But beyond the numbers, Ruth fundamentally changed how baseball was played. Before him, teams relied on bunts, base stealing, and small ball strategies. Ruth introduced power hitting as the centerpiece of the game. Between 1918 and 1921, stolen bases in the majors dropped from nearly 2,000 to under 1,500, while home runs increased from 235 to 937. Total runs rose from about 7,300 to nearly 12,000. He was also America's first true sports celebrity, a figure who transcended athletics to become a cultural icon. In an era before television, Ruth's fame spread through newspapers, newsreels, and radio. He appeared in movies, advertisements, and vaudeville shows. His rags-to-riches story, from abandoned child in a Baltimore reform school to the highest-paid athlete in America, embodied the American dream during the Roaring Twenties and the Great Depression. Ruth arrived at the perfect moment in history. Coming after the Black Sox scandal that had threatened to destroy public faith in baseball, his talent and charisma restored the sport's integrity and drew fans back to ballparks in record numbers. He helped mold baseball into the beloved national pastime it remains today. Sports writer Tommy Holmes, who covered Ruth for years, perhaps said it best. Some 20 years ago, I stopped talking about the Babe for the simple reason that I realized that those who had never seen him did not believe me. Nearly 80 years after his death, Babe Ruth remains the standard by which all baseball greatness is measured. His records have been broken, some controversially during the steroid era, but his legend endures. The abandoned boy from Pigtown became the greatest player the game has ever seen, a titan who towered over his sport like no athlete before or since. His life story reminds us that greatness can emerge from the most unlikely places, that a child declared incorrigible can become a national hero. Next up, Ted Williams. He was abandoned by his mother, ignored by his father, and raised himself on a San Diego playground. He became so good at hitting a baseball that pitchers literally changed the rules of defense to stop him. It didn't work. He left baseball twice to fly fighter jets in 2 different wars, surviving a crash landing in a burning plane. He came back both times and kept hitting. He is the last man to bat 400. No one has done it in over 80 years. His name is Ted Williams, and this is the story of the greatest hitter who ever lived. Theodore Samuel Williams was born on August 30th, 1918, in San Diego, California. His parents named him Teddy after President Theodore Roosevelt, though he later changed it to Theodore on his birth certificate because he disliked the nickname. His father, Samuel Stewart Williams, was of Welsh and Irish descent. He had served in the United States Army during the Philippine-American War. He worked various jobs, including sheriff and photographer, running a small studio in downtown San Diego that catered to sailors and their companions. His mother, May Venzor, was a Mexican-American woman from El Paso, Texas, whose family had immigrated from Chihuahua, Mexico. May Williams was a woman of intense religious conviction. She devoted her life to the Salvation Army, working the streets of San Diego, collecting donations, and ministering to the poor and homeless. The newspapers called her the Angel of Tijuana after she boldly marched into a Mexican jail demanding the release of 2 young American boys. She was fearless in her faith, but her devotion came at a cost. She was gone from home constantly, sometimes all day and half the night. Young Ted and his younger brother Danny were often left to fend for themselves. Ted later recalled having to buy and cook his own meals as a child. The boys cringed whenever their mother took them to the Salvation Army street corner revivals. Ted's father eventually left the family. Ted said he understood why. His mother was married to the Salvation Army. The Williams home at 4121 Utah Street in San Diego's North Park neighborhood was not a happy place. Ted would later say he was ashamed of his upbringing, embarrassed by his mother's public religious work and his father's seedy photo studio. He rarely returned to San Diego after he became famous, but there was one thing that saved young Ted Williams from his lonely childhood: a playground 2 blocks from his house. North Park Playground became Ted Williams's sanctuary. While other kids went home for dinner, Ted stayed until dark, swinging a bat, shagging flies, playing pickup games with anyone who would join him. The playground director was a man named Rod Luscombe, a former athlete from Arizona who recognized something special in the skinny, intense boy who never wanted to leave. Luscombe encouraged Ted, worked with him, and watched in amazement as the kid's skills developed far beyond his years. When Ted was 8 years old, his uncle Saul Venzor taught him how to throw a baseball. Saul was a former semi-professional pitcher who had once faced Babe Ruth, Lou Gehrig, and other stars in exhibition games. He saw raw talent in his nephew and became an early mentor. But it was Ted's obsession that set him apart. While other children played various sports and had multiple interests, Ted Williams had only one goal, one dream, one consuming passion. He wanted to walk down the street someday and have people say, "There goes the greatest hitter who ever lived." He carried a bat everywhere. He brought it to school, carrying it from class to class. He swung it constantly, studying his form, practicing his stroke, building the muscle memory that would one day make him legendary. At Herbert Hoover High School in San Diego, Ted became a star. He played as a pitcher initially, his arm strong enough to attract attention, but his hitting was what drew scouts from across the country. He batted an astounding .430 during his high school career, a number that seemed almost impossible. Scouts from major league teams began making regular pilgrimages to San Diego. The New York Yankees came calling, so did the St. Louis Cardinals. Bobby Durr, who would later become Williams's teammate and lifelong friend in Boston, was playing in the Pacific Coast League at the time and recommended him to his manager. Everyone who saw Ted Williams swing a bat knew they were watching something special. But Ted's mother had concerns. She thought her son was too young to leave home, too immature to handle the pressures of professional baseball in a distant city. So when Bill Lane, the owner of the San Diego Padres of the Pacific Coast League, came to the Williams home with an offer, May agreed. Her son could play professional baseball while staying close to home. In 1936, 17-year-old Ted Williams signed his first professional contract. One detail of Ted's heritage remained hidden throughout his career. His mother's Mexican ancestry was something Ted kept secret, understanding the prejudice that existed in America, particularly in Southern California. He later wrote that if he had his mother's maiden name, he would have run into problems in those days. He did not reveal his Mexican heritage publicly until 1970, long after his playing days were over. Ted Williams's first professional season with the San Diego Padres was respectable but unspectacular. He batted .271 with no home runs, learning the Pacific Coast League's pitching while still attending high school. In 1937, he showed what he could do. His average climbed to .291, and he slugged 23 home runs with 98 runs batted in. Major League scouts took serious notice. The Boston Red Sox, through general manager Eddie Collins, secured an option to sign the young outfielder. Collins brought Williams to spring training in 1938, but the brash young Californian was deemed too raw, too undisciplined, too cocky for the major leagues. The Red Sox sent him to their Minneapolis Millers affiliate in the American Association. It was meant to be a humbling experience. Instead, Ted Williams dominated. He won the American Association Triple Crown, leading the league with a .366 batting average, 43 home runs, and 142 runs batted in. He was not just good, he was historic. The Minneapolis newspapers could not believe what they were seeing. Neither could the Red Sox. Ted Williams was ready for Boston. On April 20th, 1939, Ted Williams made his major league debut against the New York Yankees at Yankee Stadium. He went 1 for 4 against Red Roughing, but the baseball world was about to learn what Minneapolis already knew. He hit .327 in his rookie year, with 31 home runs and 145 runs batted in. He led the American League in runs batted in. No rookie had ever led the league in runs batted in before. He finished 4th in Most Valuable Player voting, and he earned the praise of none other than Babe Ruth, who declared Williams the Rookie of the Year. From the beginning, Williams approached hitting differently than anyone before him. He studied pitches obsessively asking veteran teammates about every hurler in the league. He asked what Bobo Newsom threw, and what about Red Ruffing and Tommy Bridges. He wanted information, and he wanted to put it to use. He also possessed physical gifts that bordered on superhuman. His eyesight was measured at 20/10, meaning he could see at 20 feet what most people could only see at 10. He could pick up the rotation on a pitch faster than any hitter alive. He claimed he could see the bat hit the ball, though he later admitted this was an exaggeration. He could feel it and know by the sensation in his hands exactly where the ball had met the bat. Williams also had remarkable hand-eye coordination and wrist speed. His swing was a thing of scientific beauty, hips rotating to generate power, hands whipping through the zone, the bat meeting the ball with devastating precision. But physical gifts alone did not make Williams great. It was his mind, his relentless study of the craft, and his absolute refusal to swing at a pitch outside the strike zone. He led the American League in walks 6 times, not because pitchers did not fear him, though they did, but because he refused to help them by chasing bad pitches. Ty Cobb once said that Williams saw more of the ball than any man alive, but demanded a perfect pitch and took too many walks. Williams did not resent the criticism. He knew Cobb was partly right, but Williams also knew something Cobb did not fully appreciate. A walk was as good as a single for getting on base, and getting on base was the whole point. But 1940 was harder. Williams hit .344, an excellent average, but his power numbers dipped and he clashed with the Boston press. He called his salary peanuts, and he said he hated Boston and its reporters. The writers struck back, calling for him to be traded. It was the beginning of a contentious relationship that would last his entire career. Williams called the Boston sports writers the Knights of the Keyboard, and they returned the animosity in full measure. They criticized his fielding, questioned his leadership, and mocked his temperament. Williams spat at fans, made obscene gestures, and once threw a bat that sailed into the stands and struck a woman. Yet for all his conflicts with the press, Williams had a soft spot for children and ordinary fans. He visited hospitals, spent time with sick kids, and supported the Jimmy Fund Cancer Charity throughout his life. The Ted Williams most people saw was the surly, combative slugger. The Ted Williams that children saw was patient, kind, and generous with his time. The contradiction defined him. He could be cruel and warm, petty and magnanimous, all in the same afternoon. The 1941 season would become the stuff of legend. Ted Williams entered the year determined to silence his critics. He broke a bone in his right ankle during spring training, limiting him to pinch hitting duty for the first 2 weeks. But once healthy, he began one of the greatest offensive seasons in baseball history. By mid-May, his average climbed above 400. By the All-Star break, he was hitting .406 with 16 home runs and 62 runs batted in. In the All-Star game itself, he delivered one of the most famous moments in Midsummer Classic history, hitting a 3-run walk-off home run in the 9th inning to give the American League a 7-5 victory. As summer turned to fall, Williams's average fluctuated but remained in historic territory. He was hitting .413 in mid-September before a slight slump dropped him point by point. Entering the final day of the season, a doubleheader against the Philadelphia Athletics, Williams's average stood at .399.55. Rounded up, it was 400. Red Sox manager Joe Cronin offered Williams the chance to sit out both games and preserve the milestone. Williams refused. Williams said, "If I'm going to be a .400 hitter, I want more than my toenails on the line." The night before the doubleheader, Williams couldn't sleep. He walked the streets of Philadelphia with clubhouse attendant Johnny Orlando until nearly midnight, trying to calm his nerves. He woke the next morning knowing his legacy hung in the balance. In the first game, Williams went 4 for 5. A single, another single, a home run, another single. His average climbed to .404. In the second game, he went 2 for 3, a single. A double that hit the right field wall so hard it dented a speaker. His final average, .406. No player in either major league has hit .400 since. Williams also led the majors that year in home runs with 37, runs scored with 135, walks with 147, an on-base percentage of .553, and a slugging percentage of .735. His on-base percentage that season stood as a major league record for 61 years until Barry Bonds broke it in 2002. Yet Williams finished second in MVP voting to Joe DiMaggio, whose 56-game hitting streak had captivated the nation that same summer. It was one of several MVP awards Williams felt he deserved, but did not receive. In 1942, Williams was even better in some ways. He won the American League Triple Crown, leading the league with a .356 batting average, 36 home runs, and 137 runs batted in. The award, this time to Yankees second baseman Joe Gordon, whose team had won the pennant while the Red Sox finished second. Williams was devastated. One writer had left him off the ballot entirely, a slight he never forgot. But larger concerns loomed. America was at war, and Ted Williams was about to trade his bat for a cockpit. Williams enlisted in the Navy Reserve in May 1942 and went on active duty in 1943. He trained as a naval aviator, and what the instructors discovered amazed them. The same extraordinary eyesight, reflexes, and coordination that made Williams a great hitter made him an exceptional pilot. He broke records in gunnery training, his hand-eye coordination allowing him to shred target sleeves that other pilots barely nicked. His instructors said he could make a plane and its machine guns play like a symphony orchestra. He received his Gold Naval Aviator wings and a commission as a Marine Corps second lieutenant on May 2, 1944. Williams spent most of World War II as a flight instructor at Pensacola, Florida, teaching young pilots to fly the F-4U Corsair. He was awaiting orders to join combat operations in the Pacific when the war ended. He returned to baseball in 1946, not having lost a step. Ted Williams's return season was triumphant. He batted .342 with 38 home runs and 123 runs batted in, finally winning his first MVP award. The year began with a remarkable moment. On the first pitch he saw in spring training, Williams blasted a home run as if he had never left. The 1946 All-Star Game, held at Fenway Park, became a personal showcase. Williams went 4 for 4 with 2 home runs and 5 runs batted in. His second home run came against Pittsburgh's Rip Sewell and his famous eephus pitch, a looping, high-arcing delivery that had baffled hitters for years. Williams stepped toward the pitch as it floated downward, met it with a vicious swing, and sent it into the bullpen. It was the first and only time anyone ever homered off Sewell's eephus. On June 9th, he hit what is still considered the longest home run in Fenway Park history, a blast of 502 feet that landed in the right field bleachers. The seat where it landed is still painted red today, the only red seat in a sea of green. On September 13th, Williams hit the only inside-the-park home run of his career, the lone run in a 1-0 victory that clinched the pennant for Boston. It was the Red Sox's first World Series appearance since 1918. But the Fall Classic brought heartbreak. In a pre-series exhibition game, Williams was hit on the elbow by a pitch. The injury hampered his swing throughout the 7-game series against the St. Louis Cardinals. He managed only 5 singles in 25 at-bats, batting just .200 with 1 RBI. The Cardinals employed a dramatic defensive shift against Williams, positioning 5 or 6 fielders to the right of second base. Williams stubbornly tried to pull the ball through the shift rather than going to the opposite field. St. Louis won the series in 7 games, the decisive blow coming on Enos Slaughter's famous mad dash home in the 8th inning. 50 years later, when asked what he would change about his life, Williams's answer was immediate. "I would have done better in the 1946 World Series. God, I would. It was the only World Series Ted Williams ever played in." Williams won his second Triple Crown in 1947, batting .343 with 32 home runs and 114 runs batted in. Once again, he lost the Most Valuable Player award to Joe DiMaggio, this time by a single point in the voting. Once again, a writer had left Williams off his ballot entirely. The 1949 season saw Williams win his second Most Valuable Player award, but he lost the batting title on the final day of the season by the narrowest margin in history. George Kell finished at 342.9 to Williams's 342.7, a difference of 0.2 of a point. Williams went hitless in his final 4 at-bats. One more hit would have given him the title and what would have been his third Triple Crown. The Red Sox also lost the pennant that day, falling to the Yankees by 1 game. Then came Korea. In January 1952, Ted Williams received news that shocked him. The Marines were recalling him to active duty for the Korean War. He had not flown a military aircraft in nearly 8 years. He was 33 years old, in the prime of his baseball career. Williams was bitter about the recall. He had believed he had an informal agreement with the Marines that his World War II service was sufficient. But he never publicly complained, and he refused offers to spend the war playing on a service baseball team. He relearned to fly, this time mastering the F-9F Panther jet fighter. In February 1953, Captain Ted Williams arrived in Korea as a member of Marine Fighter Squadron 311, Marine Aircraft Group 33. His wingman on many missions was a fellow pilot named John Glenn, the future astronaut and senator. On February 16, 1953, Williams flew his first combat mission, a strike against a tank and infantry training facility south of Pyongyang. His plane was hit by enemy fire. He was hit again on subsequent missions. On February 19th, Williams's plane took a devastating hit from anti-aircraft fire during a mission over Kiyomipo. The aircraft caught fire, the hydraulic system failed. He could not lower his landing gear or flaps. Standard protocol called for ejection, but Williams feared that bailing out would destroy his knees and end his baseball career. He nursed the burning aircraft back toward friendly territory, guided by his wingman who flew alongside, giving hand signals because Williams's radio was out. Williams belly landed the Panther at over 200 miles per hour. The aircraft sliding nearly 2,000 feet down the runway before he could escape. He leaped from the burning wreckage moments before it could explode. The next day, he was back in the air. Williams flew 39 combat missions in Korea, was hit by enemy fire 3 times, and earned the AIR medal with 2 gold stars. He developed pneumonia and an inner ear infection that finally grounded him in June 1953. Glenn later said that, much as he appreciated baseball, Ted would always be a Marine fighter pilot to him. He said that Williams did a great job as a pilot. When Williams returned to the Red Sox in August 1953, he homered in his first at-bat. The crowd went wild, but Williams, as always, refused to tip his cap. The years after Korea saw Williams continue to defy age and expectation. In 1957, at 38 years old, he batted .388, the highest average in baseball that year and the highest by any player since his own .406 in 1941. Only a slight slump in the final weeks kept him from another run at 400. In 1958, he won his 6th and final batting title at .328. He was 40 years old, the oldest batting champion in baseball history. Williams remained dangerous into his final seasons, despite injuries and advancing age. In 1960, after hitting just .254 in an injury-plagued 1959 season, management urged him to retire. Too proud to end on a down note, he returned for 1 more year. He hit .316 with 29 home runs. He was 42 years old. On September 28, 1960, a grey, gloomy Wednesday afternoon at Fenway Park, the Red Sox were playing the Baltimore Orioles in what would be Ted Williams's final home game. Only 10,454 fans showed up to say goodbye. Before the game, there were brief ceremonies, a Paul Revere Silver Bowl, and speeches from the mayor and broadcaster Kurt Gowdy. Williams, still bitter about his treatment by the press, could not resist a jab at the writers who had tormented him for 2 decades. Williams said in spite of all the terrible things that had been said about him by the knights of the keyboard up there, he would like to forget them, but he could not. The game itself was unremarkable until the 8th inning. Williams had walked and flied out in his previous at-bats. Now he stepped to the plate against Baltimore pitcher Jack Fisher for what everyone sensed might be his final swing. The count went to 1-1. Fisher threw a fastball. Williams swung. The ball rocketed into the right field bullpen, a towering drive that sent the small crowd into ecstasy. Williams circled the bases with his head down, crossed home plate, and disappeared into the dugout. The fans stood and cheered, begging him to come out for a curtain call. His teammates pushed him toward the dugout steps. But Ted Williams would not tip his cap. He would not acknowledge the cheers. He sat on the bench, put on his jacket, and refused to emerge. 3 weeks later, a young novelist named John Updike, who had been in the stands that day, published an essay in The New Yorker that would become the most famous piece of sports writing ever produced. He titled it, "Hub Fans Bid Kid Adieu." Updike understood Williams's refusal to tip his cap, to acknowledge the crowd one final time. "Gods," Updike wrote, "do not answer letters." Williams's 521st home run left him third on the all-time list at the time of his retirement. His career batting average of .344 remains the highest of any player with 500 or more home runs. His career on-base percentage of .482 is the highest in baseball history, still unbroken. In 1970, Ted Williams published The Science of Hitting with co-author John Underwood. It became the definitive text on batting, a book still studied by players and coaches more than 50 years later. Williams divided the strike zone into 77 cells, each the size of a baseball. He mapped his expected batting average for each location. In his happy zone, belt high over the heart of the plate, he could hit 400. On the low outside corner, he would be lucky to hit 230. His philosophy was simple but profound. Get a good ball to hit. Be patient. Know the strike zone. Don't chase pitches outside your wheelhouse. Discipline, not aggression, was the key to hitting. Williams's approach influenced generations of hitters. It also influenced investors. Warren Buffett frequently cites Williams's strike zone philosophy as a model for making investment decisions. Wait for the pitch in your sweet spot. Don't swing at everything that comes your way. Ted Williams was inducted into the Baseball Hall of Fame on July 25, 1966, his first year of eligibility. He received 93.4% of the vote. His induction speech was brief, just 7 paragraphs, but it contained a passage that would prove historic. Williams said that baseball gives every American boy a chance to excel, not just to be as good as someone else, but to be better. This is the nature of man and the name of the game. He added that he hoped the names of Satchel Paige and Josh Gibson could be added as a symbol of the great Negro players who were not here only because they were not given a chance. In 1966, no player from the Negro Leagues had been inducted into the Hall of Fame. Williams, who had competed against Negro League stars in barnstorming games during his playing days, was calling for recognition of players denied the chance to prove themselves in the major leagues because of the color of their skin. No one had prompted him. No one had suggested the idea. It came from Williams himself. 5 years later, Satchel Paige became the first Negro League player inducted into the Hall of Fame. Josh Gibson followed in 1972. Today, there are 37 people associated with the Negro Leagues enshrined in Cooperstown. Williams's daughter Claudia later said it was the accomplishment that made her most proud of her father, more than any batting title or home run. After his playing career, Williams managed the Washington Senators from 1969 to 1972, and he stayed with the team when it moved and became the Texas Rangers. He won Manager of the Year in 1969 after leading the expansion Senators to their only winning season in Washington. But his managerial career was otherwise undistinguished. He retreated to Florida, pursuing his other great passion, fishing. Williams became one of the finest fly fishermen in America, inducted into the International Game Fish Association Hall of Fame. He spent summers fishing the Miramichi River in New Brunswick, Canada, and he wrote a book on fishing to go with his book on hitting. In 1991, on the 50th anniversary of his 406 season, the Red Sox hosted Ted Williams Day at Fenway Park. Frail and emotional, the 72-year-old Williams stood at home plate, pulled a Red Sox cap from his jacket, and tipped it to the crowd. It was the first time he had acknowledged Boston's fans since his earliest days as a player. The crowd wept. So did Ted. Williams suffered several strokes in his later years and required a pacemaker. He underwent open heart surgery in January 2001. On July 5, 2002, Theodore Samuel Williams died of cardiac arrest at age 83. What followed was a family tragedy that dominated headlines for months. Williams's son, John Henry, arranged for his father's body to be cryonically preserved at a facility in Arizona, despite claims from Williams's oldest daughter that Ted had wanted to be cremated. A bitter legal battle ensued before being settled out of court. It was an undignified end for a man who had lived with such fierce dignity. But the controversy over his remains cannot diminish what Ted Williams accomplished in life. Ted Williams lost nearly 5 full seasons to military service in 2 wars. He played his entire career in Fenway Park, where the distant right field fence made it harder for left-handed pull hitters to accumulate home runs. He faced the Williams shift for over a decade, defenses stacked against him in ways no other hitter had ever experienced. And still he compiled numbers that astound. He finished with a .344 lifetime batting average, 521 home runs, and a .482 on-base percentage that remains the highest in history. His 1.116 OPS ranks second all-time, behind only Babe Ruth. 2 Triple Crowns, 2 Most Valuable Player awards, 6 batting titles, 19 All-Star selections. He was the last man to hit 400. He homered in his final at-bat. He flew 39 combat missions in Korea and walked away from a burning jet. He advocated for Negro League players when no one else would. He wrote the definitive book on hitting. Ted Williams was difficult. He was stubborn. He feuded with writers and sometimes with fans. He refused to tip his cap, even when they begged him to acknowledge their love, but he was exactly what he wanted to be. When he walked down the street, people said, "There goes the greatest hitter who ever lived." And they were right. Next up, Jackie Robinson.
Grandson of slaves, son of a sharecropper, abandoned by his father at age 1. He fought racism in the Army 11 years before Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat. He received death threats every single day. Pitchers threw at his head. Runners slid into him trying to cut his legs open, and he couldn't fight back. He had promised he wouldn't. His number is the only one retired across all of baseball. Every April 15th, every player in the majors wears 42. His name is Jackie Robinson, and this is the story of the bravest man to ever play the game. Jack Roosevelt Robinson was born on January 31st, 1919, in Cairo, Georgia, a small town in the Deep South where cotton fields stretched to the horizon and the legacy of slavery still cast a long shadow. The town's name was pronounced differently than the Egyptian capital. Jackie's middle name honored former President Theodore Roosevelt, who had died just 25 days before Jackie was born. It was a name that spoke to aspiration, the belief that greatness was possible even in the most humble circumstances. Jackie was the youngest of 5 children born to Jerry Robinson and Mally McGriff Robinson. His siblings were Edgar, Frank, Matthew, who everyone called Mac, and Willa Mae. The family worked as sharecroppers on a plantation, barely scraping by on land they would never own, growing crops that would never make them rich. Before Jackie turned 2, his father Jerry abandoned the family, leaving Mally to raise 5 children alone in the Jim Crow South. It was 1920, and opportunities for a black woman in rural Georgia were virtually non-existent. The Robinsons were destitute. But Mally Robinson was not a woman who accepted limitations or surrendered to despair. She made a decision that would change the trajectory of her family's history forever. Mally gathered her children, along with some of her relatives, and boarded a train heading west. They were joining the Great Migration, the mass movement of millions of African Americans fleeing the violence and oppression of the Jim Crow South in search of better lives in the North and West. The journey took 12 days. When it ended, the Robinson family found themselves in Pasadena, California, a world away from the cotton fields of Georgia. The family settled into a small house at 121 Pepper Street in Pasadena. It was a predominantly white neighborhood, and the Robinson family was not welcomed. Neighbors called the police on them constantly, filing complaints about noise, about the children, about anything they could think of. Racial slurs were hurled at the children when they walked to school. Someone burned a cross on their lawn. Pepper Street was not safe for them. But Mally Robinson refused to be driven out. She had not traveled 3,000 miles to be intimidated. She worked as a domestic, cleaning houses and doing laundry for white families, often working extended hours to keep her own family fed. When welfare officials came to check on the family, Mally made sure her children were clean and presentable, even if their clothes were patched and worn. Jackie later recalled watching his mother work tirelessly, never complaining, and thinking she must have possessed some kind of magic to hold everything together. Robinson later wrote in his autobiography that he thought she must have some kind of magic to be able to do all the things she did, to work so hard and never complain, and to make us all feel happy. That work ethic, that refusal to quit, that determination to succeed against all odds, these were the lessons Mally Robinson passed on to her children. And nowhere would they be more evident than in her youngest son. Growing up in Pasadena, Jackie and his siblings found their escape in athletics. Sports were a way out of the poverty that surrounded them, a way to prove their worth in a society that told them they were worthless. And it quickly became clear that the Robinson children had extraordinary natural talent. Jackie's older brother, Mac, was perhaps the first hint of greatness in the family. A gifted sprinter, Mac Robinson earned a spot on the 1936 United States Olympic team. He traveled to Berlin, Germany, and competed in the Olympic Games while the Nazi regime tried to use the event to prove Aryan supremacy. Mac finished second in the 200-meter dash, beaten only by the legendary Jesse Owens, who won 4 gold medals at those games. Mac came home with a silver medal and a world record time, having proven on the world stage that black athletes could compete with anyone. But this was still America in 1936. Despite his Olympic triumph, despite representing his country at the highest level of athletic competition, the only job Mac could find when he returned to Pasadena was sweeping streets. He would push his broom through downtown wearing his Olympic sweatshirt with USA emblazoned on the front. A bitter and constant reminder of how little his achievement meant in a segregated society that refused to see black excellence. Jackie watched all of this. He saw his brother, an Olympic medalist, reduced to menial labor because of the color of his skin. He learned early that black excellence was no guarantee of equal treatment, and that lesson would shape his understanding of America for the rest of his life. At John Muir High School in Pasadena, Jackie Robinson began to establish himself as something special. He was a star in football, basketball, baseball, and track. He was not just good, he was dominant. By January 1937, the local newspaper declared that Robinson for 2 years had been the outstanding athlete at Muir, starring in football, basketball, track, baseball, and tennis. He was the kind of player who made opponents nervous just by stepping onto the field. After high school, Robinson enrolled at Pasadena Junior College in 1937, and his legend only grew. He broke his brother Mac's broad jump record with a leap of 25 feet, 6.5 inches, a new American junior college record. On the football field, he scored 131 points in a single season and gained more than 1,500 yards, drawing thousands of fans to junior college games who came just to watch him play. In baseball, he batted .417. He made the all-conference team in basketball. The local sports writers were running out of superlatives. One writer called Robinson the best all-around athlete on the coast. In the fall of 1939, Robinson transferred to UCLA on an athletic scholarship. The university's student population was less than 1% African American at the time, and there was not a single black faculty member. Robinson would be entering a world that barely acknowledged his existence, except on the playing field. At UCLA, Jackie Robinson became the first athlete in school history to letter in 4 varsity sports: football, basketball, track, and baseball. To this day, more than 80 years later, he remains the only UCLA athlete to accomplish that feat. No one else has even come close. On the football field, Robinson was a sensation. He played in the backfield alongside fellow black players Woody Strode and Kenny Washington, making the 1939 UCLA Bruins the most integrated major college football team of its era. Robinson led the NCAA in punt return average in both 1939 and 1940. He finished the 1939 season averaging 12.2 yards per carry, a school record that still stands today. That team went undefeated, finishing 7th in the final Associated Press poll. In basketball, Robinson led the Pacific Coast Conference in scoring in both 1940 and 1941. In track and field, he won the 1940 NCAA championship in the long jump, making him and his brother Mac the first siblings to each win NCAA titles. Ironically, baseball was Robinson's weakest sport at UCLA. He batted just .97 in his only season, though in his very first college game he went 4 for 4 and stole home twice. Speed and daring would always be his trademarks. It was also at UCLA where Robinson met the woman who would become his partner for life. Rachel Isom was a 17-year-old freshman nursing student when she first encountered the famous athlete on campus in the fall of 1940. Their courtship was slow and sometimes rocky. Robinson was shy and proud. Rachel was focused on her studies. But a deep connection formed between them, a bond built on mutual respect and shared values that would sustain them both through the trials ahead. In the spring of 1941, just a few units short of his degree, Robinson made the difficult decision to leave UCLA. His family needed money, and he did not believe a college degree would help a black man find work in America. "I was convinced that no amount of education would help a black man get a job," Robinson later wrote. "I felt I was living in an academic and athletic dream world." The fate of his brother Mac, an Olympic silver medalist sweeping streets, was never far from his mind. After leaving UCLA, Robinson briefly worked odd jobs, including a stint as an assistant athletic director with the National Youth Administration. He was in Hawaii playing football for the semi-professional Honolulu Bears when the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941. That attack changed everything. In April 1942, as America mobilized for World War II, Jackie Robinson was drafted into the United States Army. He was sent to Fort Riley, Kansas, and assigned to a segregated cavalry unit. Robinson applied for officer candidate school, but his application was delayed for months, not because he was not qualified, but because he was black. The official Army policy was supposed to be race neutral, but in practice, few black soldiers were admitted to officer candidate school. It took intervention from heavyweight boxing champion Joe Louis, who was also stationed at Fort Riley, to break the logjam. Louis used his fame and influence to pressure Army leadership. Robinson graduated as a second lieutenant in January 1943. He was assigned to the 761st Tank Battalion, an all-black unit that would later become known as the Black Panthers and distinguish itself in combat in Europe. But the military proved to be just as segregated as civilian life, and Robinson was not a man who accepted injustice quietly. In July 1944, Robinson was transferred to Camp Hood in Texas, where racial tensions ran high. On the evening of July 6, 1944, Robinson boarded an Army bus. He was with Virginia Jones, the light-skinned wife of a fellow black officer. They sat together in the middle of the bus. The bus driver, looking in his rearview mirror and seeing what appeared to be a black man sitting with a white woman, was incensed. He stopped the bus and ordered Robinson to move to the back, where the colored people belong. Robinson refused. He knew that the Army had recently desegregated military buses on Army posts. He knew his rights, and he was not going to surrender them to satisfy a racist bus driver. The confrontation escalated. Robinson was taken into custody and charged with multiple offenses, including insubordination and public drunkenness, despite the fact that Robinson did not drink alcohol at all. His court-martial began on August 2nd, 1944. The trial lasted 4.5 hours. Robinson faced an all-white panel of 9 Army officers who would decide his fate. Against the odds, they found him not guilty on all charges. Robinson received an honorable discharge in November 1944. In a letter during the ordeal, he wrote, "I don't mind trouble, but I do believe in fair play and justice." 11 years later, on December 1st, 1955, Rosa Parks would refuse to give up her seat on a city bus in Montgomery, Alabama, and the modern civil rights movement would ignite. But Jackie Robinson had already fought that battle in an Army courtroom in Texas when almost no one was watching. After his discharge, Robinson was at a crossroads. He was 25 years old, without a college degree, and uncertain about his future. In the spring of 1945, he joined the Kansas City Monarchs of the Negro American League as a shortstop. He was paid $400 per month, good money for the Negro Leagues, but a fraction of what white major leaguers earned. Robinson quickly proved himself one of the best players in black baseball. He batted .311 in 47 games and earned a spot in the East-West All-Star Game, the Negro Leagues equivalent of the World Series. His speed, his aggressive base running, and his competitive fire made him a standout. But Robinson was frustrated by the conditions of Negro League life, the endless bus rides across the country, the segregated hotels that would not give them rooms, the restaurants that refused to serve them, the constant grinding indignities of being black in America. He longed for something more. What he did not know was that someone very important was watching him. Branch Rickey had been the president and general manager of the Brooklyn Dodgers since 1942. He was a complex man, a devout Methodist who quoted the Bible frequently, a brilliant baseball executive who had pioneered the modern farm system, and a businessman who understood that tapping into black talent could give his team a competitive edge. Rickey had been secretly scouting Negro League players for years, building a list of candidates who might be able to break baseball's color barrier, which had been firmly in place since the 1880s, when an unwritten agreement among team owners had driven black players from the major leagues. Rickey was not just looking for the best player. He was looking for a man with exceptional talent, unimpeachable character, the courage to face abuse, and most importantly, discipline to channel his anger into excellence rather than confrontation. He found all of these qualities in Jackie Robinson. On August 28, 1945, Robinson was summoned to the Brooklyn Dodgers office at 215 Montague Street in Brooklyn. He believed he was being scouted for a new Negro League team. What followed was one of the most important meetings in American history. For 3 hours, Rickey and Robinson sat across from each other. Rickey revealed his true purpose. He wanted Robinson to break the color barrier and play for the Brooklyn Dodgers. But first, he needed to know if Robinson could handle what was coming. Rickey acted out scenarios Robinson might face. He pretended to be a racist hotel clerk refusing Robinson a room, a waiter who would not serve him, an opposing player sliding into him with spikes high while calling him every slur imaginable, a fan threatening to kill him and his family. Robinson listened to it all. Then he asked, "Mr. Rickey, are you looking for a Negro who is afraid to fight back?" Rickey's answer would define their partnership. "I am looking for a ball player with guts enough not to fight back." It was a hard thing to ask. Robinson had spent his entire life fighting back against racism, against injustice, against anyone who tried to tell him he was less than. Now he was being asked to absorb abuse without responding, at least for the first few years. Robinson agreed. He understood that the stakes were bigger than his own pride. On October 23, 1945, the signing was announced. Jackie Robinson would play for the Montreal Royals, Brooklyn's top minor league affiliate, for the 1946 season. The great experiment had begun. On February 10, 1946, Jackie and Rachel were married. They had been engaged for years, their wedding delayed by the war and uncertainty. Now they would face this challenge together. Spring training in Florida was brutal. Jim Crow was the law of the land, and Robinson was not allowed to stay with his teammates or eat in the same restaurants. Games were canceled rather than allow a black man to take the field. But Montreal was different. The city, with its French-Canadian culture and distance from American-style racism, welcomed Robinson in a way few American cities would have. Rachel later remembered that they never had a threatening or unpleasant experience there. The people were so welcoming. On the field, Robinson was spectacular. He led the International League with a .349 batting average. He scored 113 runs and drove in 66. He was named the league's most valuable player and led the Royals to the minor league championship. When the Royals won the title, Montreal fans flooded onto the field and hoisted Robinson onto their shoulders. One sports writer noted that it was probably the first time in history a black man had to run from a white mob because they loved him. Branch Rickey had found his man. Jackie Robinson was ready for the major leagues. On April 15, 1947, Jackie Robinson walked onto the grass at Ebbets Field in Brooklyn. He took his position at first base, a new position for him, since shortstop and second base were his natural spots. The crowd numbered 26,623. An estimated 14,000 were African American, many having traveled from across the country to witness history. Black fans had come from Harlem, from Philadelphia, from the Deep South, just to see a black man play Major League Baseball. Robinson was the first black player in Major League Baseball since Moses Fleetwood Walker in 1884, more than 60 years earlier. The color line that had stood for over 6 decades was finally being challenged. In his first at-bat, Robinson grounded out. He went hitless in 3 at-bats that day. But he reached base on an error and scored what proved to be the winning run. It was just the beginning. Robinson's first season was a trial by fire, one of the most intense ordeals any athlete has ever faced. The abuse came from everywhere. Robinson received stacks of death threats, letters promising to kill him if he took the field. Hotels refused to let him stay with his teammates. Restaurants would not serve him. Some of his own teammates circulated a petition refusing to play alongside a black man. A petition quashed only when Dodgers manager Leo DeRocher told the players they could go to hell if they did not like it. On the field, opposing players threw pitches at his head. They slid into him with spikes high, trying to cut his legs. Philadelphia Phillies manager Ben Chapman led his team in racist abuse so vile that it shocked even hardened baseball men. The Phillies dugout called Robinson every slur in the book, suggested he go back to the cotton fields, made monkey noises. Robinson had promised Rickey he would not fight back. And so he did not. He absorbed the hatred and channeled it into his performance. "Plenty of times I wanted to haul off when somebody insulted me for the color of my skin," Robinson later said. "But I had to hold to myself. I knew I was kind of an experiment. The whole thing was bigger than me." Not everyone abandoned him. Shortstop Pee Wee Reese, a Southerner from Louisville, Kentucky, became one of Robinson's closest allies, a gesture of support. In one famous moment when fans were heckling Robinson mercilessly, Reese walked over from his position at shortstop and put his arm around Robinson's shoulder. The gesture said everything. "This is my teammate, and I stand with him." Reese and Robinson became lifelong friends. On the field, Robinson answered his critics the only way he could, with excellence. He batted .297 with 175 hits. He scored 125 runs. He led the National League with 29 stolen bases. He hit 12 home runs and drove in 48 runs. He helped lead the Dodgers to the National League pennant. At the end of the season, Jackie Robinson was named the winner of the first ever Rookie of the Year award, an honor that would later be renamed in his honor. The Brooklyn Dodgers faced the New York Yankees in the 1947 World Series. Robinson became the first black player to appear in the Fall Classic. Though the Dodgers lost in 7 games, Robinson had proven beyond any doubt that black players could compete at the highest level. The door that had been closed for 60 years had finally been forced open. With the initial barrier broken and his position established, Robinson was finally free to be himself, fiery, competitive, outspoken, and unwilling to accept injustice quietly. In 1949, Jackie Robinson had the greatest season of his career. Working with Hall of Famer George Sisler, who had been hired as an advisor to the Dodgers, Robinson transformed his batting approach. Sisler taught him to stop lunging at pitches, to hit the ball to right field, and to wait for his pitch. The results were spectacular. He won the National League batting title with a .342 batting average, the highest of his career. He led the league with 37 stolen bases. He drove in 124 runs and scored 122. He was named to the All-Star team for the first of 6 consecutive seasons. At the end of the season, Jackie Robinson was named the National League's most valuable player, the first black player in history to receive that honor. Robinson was not just a great hitter. He was a dynamic, electrifying presence who brought a new style to baseball. His aggressive base running terrorized pitchers. He would dance off the bases, fake steals, and unnerve everyone around him. He stole home 19 times in his career, including once in the World Series. From 1949 through 1954, Robinson was named to 6 consecutive All-Star teams. He helped lead the Dodgers to 6 National League pennants. But the ultimate prize, a World Series championship, kept slipping away. Year after year, the Dodgers fell short, often losing to the New York Yankees. Brooklyn fans developed a bitter refrain, "Wait till next year." Finally, in 1955, next year arrived. The Dodgers faced the Yankees yet again in the World Series. The pattern seemed set. The Dodgers would compete heroically and then lose. They had lost to the Yankees in 1947, 1949, 1952, and 1953. No Brooklyn team had ever beaten the Yankees in a World Series. In Game 1, Robinson did something that epitomized his entire career. With Brooklyn trailing and Whitey Ford on the mound, Robinson broke for home plate. He slid under Yogi Berra's tag, or did he? Berra argued furiously, insisting Robinson was out. The umpire disagreed. Robinson was safe. He had stolen home in the World Series. The Yankees won that game, but the series was far from over. Brooklyn won 3 of the next 4 games to force a Game 7 at Yankee Stadium. Robinson, now 36 years old and battling injuries, did not start the final game. But his teammates finished the job. Johnny Padres pitched a shutout, and the Brooklyn Dodgers won their first and only World Series championship, 2-0. The celebration in Brooklyn was unlike anything the borough had ever seen. And at the center of it, finally, a champion was Jackie Robinson. Robinson played one more season in 1956. He was 37 years old, his skills diminishing, his body breaking down. After the season, the Dodgers traded him to their hated rivals, the New York Giants. Robinson refused to report. Instead, he announced his retirement on January 5, 1957. The news was broken exclusively in Look magazine, which paid him $50,000 for the story. He told the magazine his legs were gone. In 10 seasons with Brooklyn, Robinson compiled a career batting average of .311 with 1518 hits, 137 home runs, and 734 runs batted in. He had stolen 197 bases and scored 947 runs. He had led the league in batting once, in stolen bases twice, and had been named to 6 All-Star teams. He had won 1 MVP award, 1 Rookie of the Year award, and 1 World Series championship. He had walked 740 times and struck out only 291 times, a remarkable ratio that spoke to his discipline and patience at the plate. But the numbers only scratched the surface of what Jackie Robinson meant. In 1962, just 5 years after his retirement, Robinson was elected to the Baseball Hall of Fame on the first ballot. He was the first black player to receive that honor. He and pitcher Bob Feller were the first players elected on the first ballot since 1936. After baseball, Robinson threw himself into civil rights with the same intensity he had brought to the diamond. He became vice president at Chock-full-O Nuts, a restaurant chain, and he was the first black vice president of a major American corporation. He used his position to improve working conditions for the company's largely black and Puerto Rican workforce. Robinson joined the board of the NAACP, and he chaired their Freedom Fund drive. He spoke at rallies across the country, He was friends with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., and he supported King's Southern Christian Leadership Conference. In 1963, Robinson and his family attended the historic March on Washington, where King delivered his "I Have a Dream" speech. That same year, Jackie and Rachel hosted concerts at their home in Connecticut, raising bail money for civil rights activists jailed in the South. In 1964, Robinson co-founded Freedom National Bank of Harlem, a black-owned bank designed to serve African-American communities that mainstream banks had long ignored. Within 3 years, it became the most successful black-run bank in the country. In 1965, he became the first black television analyst for Major League Baseball, working for ABC. Through it all, Robinson never stopped speaking out. As a columnist for the New York Post, he wrote passionately about race, politics, and the unfinished business of American democracy. King himself acknowledged the debt the movement owed to Robinson. "Jackie Robinson made my success possible," King said. "Without him, I would never have been able to do what I did." The years after baseball were not easy ones for Robinson personally. Shortly after retiring, he was diagnosed with diabetes, the same disease that had afflicted his brothers. Despite treatment, his health steadily declined. He lost much of his vision. His hair turned prematurely white. Heart disease began to ravage his body. In 1971, tragedy struck the Robinson family. Jackie Jr., their eldest son, had returned from Vietnam struggling with drug addiction. After years of struggle, he had finally gotten clean and was working to help other addicts. Then, on June 17, 1971, at just 24 years old, Jackie Jr. was killed in an automobile accident. The loss devastated Jackie and Rachel. Robinson's final public appearance came on October 15, 1972 at the World Series, 25 years after he had broken the color barrier. Robinson, now nearly blind, and walking with great difficulty, threw out the ceremonial first pitch. He accepted a plaque honoring the anniversary of his debut, but even in that moment of celebration with his body failing him, he used his platform to push for progress. "I'm going to be tremendously more pleased and more proud," Robinson told the crowd, "when I look at that third base coaching line one day and see a black face managing in baseball." It was a reminder that even after everything he had accomplished, the work was not done. 9 days later, on October 24, 1972, Jackie Robinson suffered a massive heart attack at his home in Stamford, Connecticut. He died that morning. He was 53 years old. His funeral was held at Riverside Church in New York City. Reverend Jesse Jackson delivered the eulogy. Among the pallbearers were Pee Wee Reese and Larry Doby, the man who had integrated the American League just months after Robinson broke the National League barrier. Robinson was buried at Cypress Hills Cemetery in Brooklyn, the borough where he had changed history. Robinson's legacy has only grown in the decades since his death. In 1984, President Ronald Reagan posthumously awarded him the Presidential Medal of Freedom, the highest civilian honor in the United States. In 2005, President George W. Bush presented the Congressional Gold Medal to Rachel Robinson in a ceremony at the Capitol. On April 15, 1997, the 50th anniversary of Robinson's debut, Major League Baseball took an unprecedented step. Commissioner Bud Selig announced that Robinson's number 42 would be retired across all of Major League Baseball. No player on any team would ever wear that number again. It was the first time any professional sports league had retired a number league-wide. Robinson remains the only player in baseball history to receive that honor. Today, April 15th, is celebrated as Jackie Robinson Day throughout baseball. Every player, manager, coach, and umpire wears number 42. It is a day to remember not just what Robinson did on the field, but what he meant to the nation. Rachel Robinson, now over 100 years old, has spent the decades since her husband's death preserving and extending his legacy. In 1973, she founded the Jackie Robinson Foundation, which has provided scholarships to more than 1,700 minority students. In 2022, the Jackie Robinson Museum opened in New York City. The movie 42, released in 2013 and starring Chadwick Boseman as Robinson, introduced his story to a new generation. When you think about Jackie Robinson, the statistics matter: the .311 batting average, The 6 All-Star selections, the Most Valuable Player Award, the World Series ring. But what made him immortal was something beyond statistics. He was a man who faced hatred and answered with excellence, who endured death threats and responded with dignity, who was told he wasn't good enough, smart enough, or worthy enough, and proved the doubters wrong every single day. He didn't just break the color barrier in baseball, he helped break it in America. His success on the field paved the way for Larry Doby, Willie Mays, Hank Aaron, and every black player who came after. His courage off the field inspired a generation of civil rights activists who looked at Jackie Robinson and saw that change was possible. As Robinson wrote in his autobiography, published the month he died, "There I was, the black grandson of a slave, the son of a black sharecropper, part of a historic occasion, a symbolic hero to my people. I know that I am a black man in a white world. In 1972 and 1947 at my birth in 1919, I know that I never had it made. But in the struggle to make it, for himself, for his family, for his people, for his country, Jackie Robinson became something rare, a man who truly changed history. Number 42, the first, the bravest, a legend." Like and subscribe for more baseball documentaries. Until next time.